When the gas station exploded, everyone stepped back. Only one person ran forward, the 68-year-old mechanic, and then everyone realized who he really was. Welcome to Human Stories. Before we begin this powerful story, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. The air in the garage was always the same, a mix of motor oil, metal, and sweat. The walls were covered with calendars and old car photos that hadn't changed in years. 3 vehicles could fit on the ground floor of the 2-story building, and the upper floor was used as a small office. But real life happened here, on this greasy floor, among these noisy machines. Frank Miller, 68 years old, walked through the door at exactly 7 a.m. every morning. Same navy coveralls, same graying beard, same silence. He'd worked here for 12 years, and no customer ever really remembered his name. They all called him Old Man, and he'd respond. He didn't like talking much. The garage owner was young Danny Rodriguez. When his father left him the business, Frank Miller had already settled in here. Danny never thought about firing him, because this man knew every engine sound, could find the cause of any breakdown, and most importantly, was never late. Nobody knew Frank Miller's past. No one had asked where he came from, how he got into this business, whether he had a family. He wouldn't tell anyway. He'd come in the morning and leave in the evening. The only thing people noticed was that sometimes his hands would shake, especially in summer heat when the metal got too hot. Right next to the garage was Murphy's gas station. Small, family-owned. The owner, Pat Murphy, was an honest man who worked day and night. He kept his business running with 2 pumps, a small convenience store, and a country radio that never stopped playing. Frank Miller would go there every lunch break to drink his coffee. He and Pat Murphy didn't talk much, but there was respect between them. That Wednesday started like any other day. Frank Miller had arrived at 7 a.m., starting his day with the coffee Danny brought. The vehicle he was working on was an old Chevy Silverado. He was dismantling and examining the engine, cleaning each part individually. He loved his work, fixing things, repairing what was broken. This gave him peace. Around noon, strange sounds started coming from Murphy's gas station. At first, nobody paid attention. All kinds of sounds are normal at gas stations. But then the sounds changed. Shouting, running around, panic. Frank Miller dropped the wrench in his hand. He listened carefully. That sound from 30 years ago. The sound of panicking people. His heart began to race. Right then, a huge explosion came from Murphy's gas station. The windows shook. The alarm of the pickup truck Frank Miller was working on started blaring. Then came a second explosion. This time bigger, more powerful. Danny ran outside in panic. "What the hell? Frank, there's a fire at Murphy's." Frank Miller straightened up, slowly, as if time had stopped. The expression in his eyes had changed. He was no longer that quiet, docile mechanic. There was clarity in his eyes, determination. "Give me your keys," he said to Danny. "But man, what are you going to do? Call 911? "Give me your keys," Frank Miller repeated. His voice was calm but firm, non-negotiable. As Danny handed over the keys, Frank Miller quickly headed to the toolbox in the corner of the garage. There, on the dusty shelf, was an old duffel bag nobody ever noticed. What he pulled out of it surprised everyone. Fire mask, gloves, a special axe, and a red badge. Firefighter Frank Miller was written on the badge. Oklahoma City Fire Department, 1975 to 2005. Below the dates. Danny was frozen. "Frank, you were." But Frank Miller had already started running. Despite being 68 years old, his steps were youthful, as if his body remembered the reflexes from 30 years ago. Murphy's gas station was engulfed in flames. People had gathered around, watching in fear. Large flames rose around the pumps. And what Frank Miller saw at that moment terrified everyone. Pat Murphy was trapped inside the station. The fire department hadn't arrived yet. There wasn't even an ambulance, just crowds, panic, and helplessness. Everyone was moving away from the gas station, because there could be a bigger explosion at any moment. But Frank Miller was running in the opposite direction, straight toward the flames. Someone from the crowd shouted, "Old man, are you crazy? Get back here." Frank Miller didn't stop. He quickly put on the equipment he'd taken from the pickup truck. He put on his mask, pulled on his gloves, and then, in front of everyone's eyes, he entered the flames. Inside was like hell. Smoke, heat, gasoline smell. But this was a familiar environment for Frank Miller. For 30 years, he'd been in thousands of fires. In bigger ones, more danger. He found Pat Murphy behind the cash register on the floor. He was unconscious, but breathing. Frank Miller lifted him onto his back, just like he'd done for years. And from among the flames, he started running toward the safe area. The crowd waiting outside held their breath. They watched the old mechanic emerge from the flames, and when he came out with unconscious Pat Murphy in his arms, everyone understood. This man was not ordinary. Frank Miller laid Pat Murphy on the ground and immediately began first aid. He checked his pulse, cleared his airway. His movements were professional, precise, and effective. "Somebody call 911, he shouted. "Smoke inhalation, but he'll make it." Right then, fire truck sirens were heard. 2 vehicles were approaching, but the fire was still growing, couldn't be controlled. Firefighter Jake Thompson, as soon as he got out of the truck, saw Frank Miller. He didn't recognize this old man in mask and equipment, but he noticed his professional stance. "Who are you, sir?" he asked. Frank Miller removed his mask. His face was covered in soot, but his eyes were clear. "Firefighter Frank Miller. Retired. I can help you out." Jake paused for a moment. He'd heard this name. There were legends about this man, but he wasn't completely sure now. "Give us a rundown of the situation," he said. Frank Miller quickly explained. 2 pumps are burning. Main tank's not compromised yet, but we got maybe 10 minutes. If you approach from the south side, you can shut off the main valve. Winds coming from the north, we can direct flames eastward. This analysis was so accurate that Jake was amazed. This man really was an experienced firefighter. "Come with us," he said. Frank Miller shook his head. "I'm too old for this now, but I can guide you through it." For the next 45 minutes, Frank Miller guided the young firefighters. He explained which approach angle to use, how to adjust water pressure, how to use wind direction, and the fire was brought under control. Pat Murphy was taken to the hospital by ambulance. Doctors said he had smoke inhalation, but wasn't in life-threatening danger. Frank Miller's quick intervention had saved his life. While the fire department was finishing their work, Jake came over to Frank Miller. "Sir, you're a legend. I've never seen anyone with that much experience." Frank Miller quietly gathered his equipment. "I just did my job," he said. "You worked in the fire department for 30 years, right?" "Yes." "Why did you quit?" Frank Miller paused for a moment. A distant look appeared in his eyes. "Because some fires can't be put out," he said quietly. Jake didn't understand what he meant, but he didn't ask more questions. He could sense there was something heavy in this man's past. As the crowd dispersed, Frank Miller returned to his garage. He washed his hands, put his equipment back in its old place. As if nothing had happened, he continued working on the Silverado's engine. But now everyone knew who he was. The next day, the local newspaper was full of the story. "Retired firefighter saves gas station." In the photo, Frank Miller could be seen carrying Pat Murphy out from among the flames. Danny brought the newspaper and showed it. "Frank, you're a hero." Frank Miller didn't even look at the newspaper. "I'm no hero," he said. "I just knew what to do." "But why didn't you ever tell us?" You were a firefighter for 30 years. Frank Miller put down the wrench in his hand. He was silent for a long time. Then, very slowly, he began to speak. Do you remember the big earthquake in '95? I was working at the Oklahoma City Fire Department then. I was on the first response team. His voice began to tremble, but he continued. That day a huge fire broke out. An apartment building had collapsed. People were trapped inside. I went in with the team. We saved 2 children. But when we were going up to the 3rd floor, I heard a sound. A baby crying. Danny held his breath. I went back. The team had evacuated, but I couldn't leave that baby. I went in. I found the baby, took her in my arms. But on the way out, the ceiling collapsed. Frank Miller's hands were shaking. The baby died. In my arms. Even after I got out, she died. Smoke inhalation. Her tiny lungs couldn't handle it. Danny didn't know what to say. From that day on, whenever I heard a child's voice, I'd panic. When I went to fire scenes, my hands would shake. I worked for 6 more years, but I wasn't the same anymore. I retired in 2005. How did you end up here? I ran away. From everything. From Oklahoma City. From the fire department. From my past. I wanted to come here and work quietly. Nobody would know me. Nobody would ask questions. Danny understood. This man hadn't run away because he was a hero, but because he suffered from the pain of heroism. But why did you intervene yesterday? Frank Miller smiled. For the first time, Danny had seen him smile in 12 years. Because Pat Murphy has a little granddaughter. 3 years old. Sometimes she comes here, talks to me. Yesterday I heard that child's voice in my head. She was asking, "Where's Grandpa?" And I said to myself, this time I won't run away. Very little work was done at the garage that day. People kept coming to try to see Frank Miller. He told them all the same thing. I just did my job. When evening came, Pat Murphy's son came. He had flowers in his hand. Frank Dad's in intensive care, but he's fine. The doctors say he lived because of you. Frank Miller didn't take the flowers. No need, son. Your father's health is enough. But we don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me. I just saved my neighbor's life. Anyone would have done that. The young man left, but left the flowers on Frank Miller's desk. That night, as Frank Miller was walking home, he walked with the same quiet steps. But inside he was different. For the first time in 18 years, he didn't hear that baby's voice in his head. Maybe he was finally starting to forgive himself. The next morning, he came at 7 a.m. again. Same navy coveralls, same silence. But now the atmosphere in the garage was different. People saw him differently. A customer asked while picking up his car, "Were you really a firefighter?" "Yes." "Why did you quit?" Frank Miller stopped his wrench. He thought for a long time. Then, in a very calm voice, he answered, "Because sometimes the biggest fire is inside a person, and it can take 18 years to put it out." The customer didn't understand what he meant, but from his tone, he decided not to ask more questions. Days passed. Frank Miller returned to his old routine again, but he wasn't completely the same anymore. Sometimes he'd look at his old equipment, take the badge in his hand, and examine it. 30 years of memories would pass before his eyes. A month later, the city's fire chief, Captain Williams, came to his garage. He had an official offer in his hand. "Frank Miller, I know you. I know about your heroism in Oklahoma City. I have a proposal for you." Frank Miller cleaned the motor oil off his hands with a rag. "I'm listening. We want you to train young firefighters. Your experience is very valuable. 2 days a week, whatever hours you prefer." Frank Miller thought about it. He thought for a long time. "Can I start over at this age?" "You never stopped. You just took a break." That night, Frank Miller sat at home and took out his old photographs. The ones with the fire department team, moments of receiving awards, poses with people he'd saved, and the ceremony held for that baby. That photo taken while he was crying at her grave. The next morning, he called Captain Williams at the garage. "I accept, but I have one condition." "What is it?" "In the first lesson, I'll tell them this. Sometimes you might not be able to save someone, and this won't destroy you, it will strengthen you, because those you save will always be more than those you couldn't save." Captain Williams smiled. "That's the most important lesson anyway." Frank Miller put on a firefighter uniform again at age 68, this time as an instructor. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he passed on his experiences to young firefighters. In his first lesson, he said things that weren't written in any book. Fire isn't just flames, kids. Fear, regret, guilt inside a person is also fire. Real heroism is being able to put these out. The students were very impressed. This man wasn't just giving technical knowledge, he was teaching life. Months passed. Frank Miller continued both working at the garage and participating in fire department training. People knew him now, but he still maintained the same humility. One day, during training, a young firefighter asked, "Frank, did you ever regret it?" Choosing this profession? Frank Miller thought for a long time. Then, with all sincerity, he answered, "Every person experiences a fire in their life, son. Some burn up and are finished in this fire. Some run away, distance themselves, but some learn to put out this fire, and then they help put out other people's fires." "Which one are you?" Frank Miller smiled. It was a different smile now. Peaceful, reconciled. "I'm the man who first burned, then ran, and finally learned to put it out. And now I'm teaching you so that no fire can define you. What defines you is what you do after that fire." This story continues today. Frank Miller still works at his garage, still trains young firefighters, and he still carries that red badge in his pocket. But now that badge isn't a mark of shame, it's a symbol of pride. Because he understood that real heroism isn't being perfect, it's being able to get up after falling. I ask you, have you ever met someone like Frank Miller? Someone who hid their past, lived quietly, but revealed their true identity at a critical moment. Share their stories in the comments. If this story touched you, subscribe and share. At Human Stories, we'll continue to give voice to silent heroes. See you in the next story. And remember, sometimes the greatest heroes are hidden inside the most ordinary-looking people.